Gaming popularity has hit an all-time high and everyone wants it. Tech companies, social media spaces, advertisers, and now colleges. While not all colleges have completely bought into the idea of supporting gaming careers, esports or otherwise, there are people from professors to industry leaders taking charge to develop curricula and guide students to the industry effectively. But what does it really take to transition from school to the industry effectively? And how can colleges and universities close the information gap for students so they're prepared for the world of work? And what's the best way to build a pipeline from school to the workforce for diverse candidates? Today, we are joined by three guests who will answer these questions and more to help us demystify gaming jobs. I'm Robin, and this is Open World Dialogue sponsored by Maximum Games. Now, on to our guest speakers. First up, we have Bonnie Harris-Lowe. Bonnie is a game designer and narrative designer from Greenville, South Carolina. She has studied game history, theory, and production for over a decade, culminating in her earning an MFA in Interactive Media and Games for the University of Southern California in May 2020. The central thesis of Bonnie's design philosophy is the importance of diverse and inclusive representation. To that end, she has dedicated her work to uplifting people with marginalized identities and creating more opportunities for them in the games industry. Up next, we have Dr. Laquana Cook. Dr. Cook is an associate professor of digital rhetoric at WCU. She is a digital media scholar, instructor, and designer whose work has been exhibited and presented at national conferences and game expositions. She has over 10 years of experience in developing and facilitating media and STEAM-based programs for nonprofits, secondary and higher education sectors. And last but not least, we have Mikey Rower. Mikey is a talent professional with a passion for telling a company's story to attract top talent with over 7 years of experience in full cycle recruiting, university relations, and employer branding. As a potato expert turned evil genius, she's the campus program manager where she oversees the award-winning Genius League internship program, which develops the leaders of tomorrow. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I'm super excited to discuss this because I used to be a career coach back in the day. And one of the things a lot of people wanted to do is jump into the gaming industry, but I didn't have the ability to walk them through that process. And a lot of people students in particular, were having a lot of misunderstandings of what the real process is and what it's actually like to work in the industry. So having you all here is super helpful. So I always like to start off every single open world dialogue talking about a foundational question. And so we're going to start there. So the first question to you all is that since I think there's an information gap between colleges and universities, what do you think the reason is behind the information gap between what students need to know for the gaming industry and what they're learning in college? And anybody can jump into that.
First off, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Robin, and thanks for having me. I think a big thing that I see from my perspective is that the industry changes very fast, much faster than a school curriculum can. One example is that Unreal Engine recently launched their new version, Unreal Engine 5. And as that's happening, a lot of studios are pivoting mid-development into UE5 and dumping their UE4 projects. The studio that I work at included in this. But that's not something that you'd really be able to do in a classroom setting because there's all kinds of problems that we're running into in our job with conflicts from UE4 transitioning to UE5, work getting lost, having to learn all of UE5's new tools and everything. And that kind of pivot in the middle of a semester would completely disrupt the workflow of a classroom and a professor's syllabus. So that's definitely a big issue on the technical side, I'd say.
I'll probably just zoom out a bit, and from my perspective, it's more of a multi-layered gap that exists. So a lot of these gaps are largely inherent to the traditional divides that exist in the academy, the industry, and the community, and just everyday action. And so we see this in both like old and new fields. In games, I like to say that games is a relatively newer field than, let's say, the medicine field or whatever it may be. So, and that kind of connects to sort of the lack of hands-on integration and various pedagogies that can center these sort of real projects and collaborations that should be existing between the academy and industry, and sort of connecting to what Bonnie said in regards to the ever-changing field of the games industry and the technology that comes with it. A lot of the issues that I run into as the director of ICAM Summit Media Academy is the access to the software, because like Bonnie said, the academy is a bit more slower in how they integrate curriculum, technologies, etc. But along comes with that issues of how do you access the key codes to this software, and how do you work with the IT department to get access to the software, and then they have to shoot it up to legal, and legal has to get involved, and so there are these sort of long bureaucratic processes that slow down that integration. So we tend to have to find other workarounds for that. Like me personally, I use software that's free or open source, and these aren't the software that are utilized in the games industry. So there's multi-layers of disconnects here. So, but I think technology is where we can peel back those layers and see all of the other logistics that go with it.
Right. I think that I agree with what Bonnie and Dr. Cook have said. I think a lot of things too, when we see this in other industries coming from outside of esports. I've been with Evil Geniuses now for almost a year, to be a full year next week, which is crazy to think about. But I saw this with other students as well in different industries. I came from food manufacturing, and you would hear students say, well, my professor said this, or we're working on these types of things. And that's not what we're doing in the real world, or the quote unquote real world, kind of wherever you're working. And having these opportunities for students to step into internship opportunities does give them those little gaps and those understanding of what's really happening. But I think a lot of what Dr. Cook has said, there is a larger gap that's happening, and that academia is a lot farther behind because they do have more hoops to jump through than we do out here. We're solving these real world issues and really trying to get this, our esports teams out and our games out and this technology kind of moving quickly to make sure that we are up to date on everything we have going on. But we're not then informing the universities that what they need to do and turning back and saying, hey, this is actually what we're looking for when it comes to our students. This is actually the information that we need for them to do. So I think it's a two-way street. We're not preparing them either. We're not giving them that information to say, we're about to do something different, or in the next 2 years, we're going to be looking for students in this niche. Can you help us here? And 2 years is not a lot of time. I've been out of school for a very long time, and I feel like as soon as I entered, I was eons behind the corporate world. So really making sure that there's that two-way street and saying, this is actually what we need in the next couple years, but also, can you do that, and how can we support you while we go through this, I think is really important.
Very true. And I think I'm just going back into my to be honest, it was PTSD working in higher education as an academic advisor and career advisor. So it was Dr. Cook is laughing, but it's the truth. So I go back and I think about these experiences that I've had when I've talked to students, and they will say, well, my professor said this. And in many ways, their professors are correct if they've worked in the industry or they're continuing to build and stay in that industry and have those partnerships. But then we have the professors who are like, it's all the same, just do this kind of thing and you'll get the job. And it's like, it's a huge disconnect. It's one that still frustrates me to this day, because both the industry and schools aren't really talking to each other. So then we have students who are buying into, honestly, a really hard industry to get into, period, and then they graduate and they're hitting a brick wall. So I guess my next question for all of you is, however you see fit, what do you think both the industry and colleges can do to build relationships with one another? Is it co-ops? Is it internships? Is it just sitting down and talking to one another? Like, not that you have to solve every university and every company's problem, but what do you think is the first step to building that bridge?
Well, there are a lot of first steps, but I would say yes and yes to the co-ops and building these relationships with industry professionals. But I am a pedagogue, so my argument is always like an intentional sort of pedagogy, like how we're teaching, how we're engaging students, the sort of assignments and assessments should be open to sort of interrogating these relationships that we're talking about with industry and the academy, but also through the integration of these relationships, we should be able to innovate new relationships. And that could simply mean thinking more creatively and less sort of like stagnant in these old traditional routes to the games industry. Everyone is like, let's start a games program, let's start a games minor, a games major. And I feel like, and this is me as an English professor, groomed coming out of engineering programs, and I'm teaching in the English department, but it wasn't a hard sell, because if you're truly looking at the landscape of just culture and society in general and how we can prepare these students, it's an easy sell. So I think these relationships have to be built on these authentic pathways of, hey, let's think more creatively about this hot topic, project-based learning, or all those other things. Like, what does it mean to have a project that's integrated within a games development studio? So I try to teach my classes not as a class, but as a game dev studio, and how I've experienced game dev, and kind of engage those social norms in game dev, and also the hard skills of learning computational literacy and so forth. So if we think more holistically and creatively about the games industry and how we want to prepare students for it, I think together we can make this work.
As someone who runs an intern program, I'm going to go with internships. The Genius League, which is the intern program that I oversee, was started only in 2020. It's only 2 years old, which is crazy to think about. And again, someone who does not come from the esports industry, I never knew that esports needed interns, but everyone needs interns. Everyone needs that opportunity. As someone who never had an internship, because I was a psychology major who wanted to go into recruiting and no one wanted to talk to me at career fairs, it was difficult. But I always think, what would I want as an intern? When I look back at, 20-year-old me, what would she want to do in this internship opportunities? What kind of opportunities would she give? And the one thing that I really focus on in any internship program that I've run, this is my second big intern program that I've overseen in the last couple of years, is what experiences are going to better the student and make sure that we're taking in what they've learned in the classroom, but also giving them the real world experience that they're looking for. But what's also going to help us as an organization? Where are we going to be able to let the student run free with an idea and say, this is actually what we're looking for in the world? Or the best example is my social media interns. I do not understand Twitter, to say the least. I got Twitter for this job and I tweet very randomly, mainly about the things that are happening in the Genius League. But to have someone so embedded into the esports world, into League of Legends and Dota 2 and all these other titles, is so important to us, because when we've got people who have been out of school and kind of are out of the scene for so many years, we don't know the trends. We don't know how to speak the language. We don't know what's actually happening within these areas. So let's bring those interns in and give them the opportunity to help run social media, to look at innovation and data, to look at the way that our gaming operations team is looking. Because yes, they don't have as much experience, but if they are indebted and they've been so immersed in this ecosystem, they have more answers than we think that they do. So let's give them that opportunity and let them run with it. My biggest thing, I say this all the time, my interns today are my leaders tomorrow. I know for sure I will work for at least a handful of the interns that I've worked with and helped with, because they are absolute rock stars. And if we can't give them the resources, the support, and the experience today, then we're ruining the industry for tomorrow. So we need to think that through too when it comes to our students and the opportunities that we give, whether that's conversations like this, Discord events, live events, any of those different things, making sure that we're reaching out to them and saying, we want to help you, how can we do that, is so imperative.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that and I guess kind of prod the idea of internships a little bit more, as far as like a quantity mismatch, I think, is what I experienced when I was in grad school, at least, of like, I'm in an absolutely enormous games program, and I went to, University of Southern California, which is one of the top games programs, and there's a lot of game studios around it. But even then, it's like we're fighting tooth and nail for a very small pool of internships with a very large group of people. And so I wonder if there's more creative solutions as far as how we could structure internships differently, maybe have some more group-oriented programs for students that are managed through industries. Lost my train of thought. I think that was the main thing I wanted to get across this. I got through that.
So I think all of this is super important, because one of the things that you all brought up in very different ways is just building relationships, having holistic ideas around what industry and universities, colleges can do. But then one of the things that popped up in my head is that also it's important, at least for me, that students understand, and not all students are like this, but I was very naive, so I'm going to assume that there are a couple of naive students out there, right? That there's more to the games industry than just being a game developer. And I need you to understand that there's people in marketing, HR, social media, like Mikey brought up. You could do program management. You might be doing product management. There are things everywhere. And I always have an issue of the people say, I want to create games. And I'm like, I don't want to be the type of person saying you can't create them. Go do what it is that you believe that you want to do. But also be realistic and understand that it's going to be difficult to do that kind of job as well. So, I'll obviously try, but do other things to also get yourself in the industry as well. And so that's always been something that's super important to me. So we're going to go ahead and sort of transition and start talking about like networking. We always talk about, I do always talk about networking, how important it is. And I do this myself, so I'll speak for myself, but I know other people do it as well. We always want to network vertically, like, oh, this person's like the well, that's real high. I don't think anybody's going to try to meet with a C-suite person, but somebody who's mid-level, and you're like, oh, this person's a manager, they're doing exactly what I want to do, so I'm going to butter this person up, get to know them, network. But people also forget to network with their peers as well. So my question is to all of you, are there methods in doing networking both vertically and horizontally, so with people who are quote unquote above you and those who are on your same level, in a way that is authentic without seeming unprepared?
I definitely think so. I'm going to give a plug right now. We have a Genius League Discord where we have over 4,000 community members.
Wow.
And they're networking. And that's where the Genius League started. So I was not with Evil Geniuses when the Genius League was born, but that's where it started, as a community in Discord, where we truly went without seeing face-to-face contact. I don't know why Evil Geniuses ever thought to bring an intern program in the midst of a global pandemic. It worked because of Discord and that network and that community to bring in like-minded individuals. Whether you come from esports or you don't, you have a place to come and talk. My interns run the Discord. I just oversee it because, again, coming from somewhere else, I didn't understand what a Discord was until I got here. But having them come in, and they run weekly events. So last night we had a portfolio review that 2 interns ran. They brought in their other interns in the graphic design area, but we also brought in our creative director, and he gave a review of people's their portfolios, right on the spot, which is fantastic. There's consistent conversations that are happening in there. When Evil Geniuses was at LCS Summer Split this weekend, popping off in that area, but we're also giving opportunities to share industry openings, which is fantastic. So no matter where it comes from, usually from Twitter, someone's going to post it in the Discord. We have wins and flexes. I'm hosting a resume review next week for people who are interested in our internship opportunities. Really being able to say there are other opportunities, and you don't have to go up to Nicola Point Jameson, our CEO, who gets consistent DMs across all platforms for someone to kind of work with her. I get a lot of them too. And yes, I have the answers, but also talk to the interns who are currently with us and who are past with us. Have those conversations with them to say, what was your experience like? How did you get a full-time offer? Whether that's with our organization or another organization, really being able to kind of hone into that is so important. I do tell people, go find that person that you'd like to have their job in the next 2 to 5 years, because your dream career, your dream career is a dream until you get it. So let's look to those 2 to 5 year gaps and say, I want to be a marketing director in the next 5 years. Okay, find someone that has that title at a company you're interested in, connect with them, and then look at what they've done. Send them a personal note saying that you'd like to have a conversation. If they don't get back to you, it's okay. But just go connect with them on LinkedIn or Twitter, depending on the space. But there's definitely other ways to do it with people around you that I think, like you just mentioned, people don't think about. I don't think about networking within my own little bubble, especially when I was coming out of college. That's definitely where I found my first couple jobs. And that's how I found this job.
Really quick. Oh, Bonnie, no, it was fine. I was going to actually, I know you're going to probably talk about this, but if you can also focus on like, how important is it to do this in the industry, right? So we've heard from Mikey from the very student perspective, but once you get in the industry, like how important is it to build those relationships both vertically and horizontally?
Yeah, I think they're both equally important, but for different reasons. Because with the vertical networking, I was lucky to have, people around me in grad school through my teachers who were industry professionals and like friends of friends and things like that who were, obviously vertical because I was a student, I didn't have a job. And, having those vertical connections, put like a circle of people around me who are both invested in my success and who have the resources to help me secure it. But the horizontal relationships I formed both in my grad school cohort and in my current, I think those are the relationships where those are the people you're in the trenches with, and you support each other through, some really hard times because you're, having a lot of struggles and a lot of success kind of in tandem. And one thing that I think is a problem in the industry that a friend of mine, he put it this way once, that the people who are like kind of elders in the games industry now are people who built it, and then in a lot of ways they pulled the ladder up behind them, right? Mm-hmm. And so the people who are in your horizontal network are the ones who, if they happen to, start building their own ladder and climbing up a little bit before you, they're the ones who are going to be able to help pull you up from like the friend perspective. So I think there's definitely value in both. You can get advancement from both. I think the vertical networking will get you advancement faster, whereas like the horizontal networking is like a long-term investment in, having somebody that you can lean on for both career support and emotional support as you experience these changes together.
I couldn't even say that better than you. Like, that's the truth. That's how I feel about all kinds of networking across, whether you're in class, whether you're doing internships, whether you're in the industry. So that was super helpful. Now we're going to stick with talking about this, and I kind of want each of you to take this from a different perspective. So this next question is, what makes a great candidate for hire? Are there best practices we can give people who want to stand out? So obviously Mikey has a very particular perspective on what should be done, but Bonnie, as somebody in the industry, and Dr. Cook is somebody who's teaching these skills, like what's the best way in your industry, the way you think of a good hire for these positions out there? What's the perspective from you?
Bonnie, do you want to go first?
Oh, I can. I was waiting to see if somebody else wanted to talk.
No, you go for it and I'll follow up with you. I saw your face. It kind of looked like, I'm going to say something.
I think the biggest thing I would say is be knowledgeable and use that knowledge to be creative. In my experience, both as somebody who has been in interviews, who's been on both sides of the table in interviews rather, there's a lot of hypothetical questions when it comes to use for game design positions of like, how would you solve this particular design problem? What would you do in this scenario? And I think the more unique your answer is, the better off you'll be. And a good way to, come up with those unique answers is to have like some good background knowledge that you can draw on. It's good to have like an example of something that you've like maybe seen in a game that you liked and how you would improve upon it, or maybe something that you really didn't like and how you think they should have done it instead, that approaches whatever hypothetical problem you're being presented with. Obviously bringing up an example like that bringing up the example itself isn't a requirement. I think the priority is just having the information so that you can use it to inspire you to your own unique solutions.
And I was just going to say, I see a lot of overlap way back in the day. I mean, way back in the day. I used to be an account executive for the creative group, which is under Robert Half International. And so under the creative group, we work primarily with creators and creatives. So I work with like ADs, other directors in art and stuff like that, and sort of the material space, but also like graphic space as well. And I would say, kind of on the strength of what Bonnie was saying, like you have to be able to give specific examples when you're sort of, talking about your skill sets, make it more tangible and materialize them so that they can kind of see as you're talking, they could see your resume and your skills sort of like as this narrative moving through. If you can create this narrative on your resume, I'm in academia, so on your resume as well as sit there and kind of narrate it, it becomes more palpable to them. Number one. Number two, what I've noticed is a lot of people, and I teach a UX class and a usability class, like that agile methodology is real. Like I think across the board, not even just in tech classes, but also writing classes, like your ability to be optimal and efficient, to be able to collaborate and communicate with people is important. And I've noticed that because I am a communicator, my major's in communication, it was relatively easy for me, but those who lost in getting the internship and co-op is because those, I hate to call it hard and soft skills or soft skills, but those soft skills did not translate or come across in an interview, and clearly didn't come across through the resume itself.
Just really quickly, do you mind me asking like how important it is for students who are transitioning into the industry to also understand theory?
Okay, so I love theory. Like I've been groomed as a researcher, but ironically, I am at a teaching institution. And so I wouldn't say ironically, I would say ironically, I'm at a teaching institution. So, okay, with theory is important because it adds a level of sort of like creative thinking. And the only way theory is good is if you can translate theory to practice, in my theory. Like if you can't translate theory to practice, at least coming from industry and moving back and forth, then theory is for naught. So I would say that's important because it would give you sort of the internal thinking and creative thinking where you're intentional and strategic about the things you do in the space, in the development studio, when you're designing. And it helps build these sort of like synaptic bridges in your brain. You're like, oh, Aristotle did say, but honestly, it worked for me. It worked for me. In fact, that's how I have a book contract right now where I write about that same thing you're talking about, connecting theory with practice, which is called praxis, right? And I talk about how we can do that with game design, connecting game design and sort of critical pedagogy and design research and design thinking and all those things like agile methodology. How can we translate that into a pedagogy? So I'm actually writing on that right now.
That sounds very exciting.
Well, mine's not going to be as exciting as that for sure. But I think that the really big thing that we want to look at in it, and Dr. Cook brought this up a little bit too, is your resume is what's going to get you through the door. And we can start there. And I mean, I could talk about this for the entire time that we have here, but making sure, one, that your resume is spelled correctly. That's my number one caveat. Read through it, make sure that the template looks the same, that you have the same font throughout. Because if it doesn't, you show me that you don't care about detail and I'm not going to look at it. And you could be the best intern I've ever had or candidate for this role, but I'm not going to look at it because you're showing me that you don't care about the detail. So that's one really big thing. I think also really thinking through and saying, what experience do I have? And Dr. Cook also brought up hard and soft skills. What about those transferable skills? Again, no esports experience. I've had no experience in any industry that I've sat in before going in, but I showed them that I have those transferable skills to say, I can communicate efficiently and effectively. I know how to schedule things and stay on task. Deadlines are important to me. This is how I run. I've people managed before, maybe not directly, but indirectly. Where can I tie those back in to say, I don't have the exact experience that you're asking about, but I do have experience doing things like this that are equivalent to that. I think is really important when you're talking through interviews and having those conversations. Great example, I have a social media intern. His major is biochemistry. social media and biochemistry don't mix often. But he runs social media for his esports club at his university, and his resume was stellar because he talked to that experience. I think that students think, if I don't have an internship or I've never had a real job, that I don't have the experience that you're looking for, and that's not true. That's not true at all. You have that experience. I was in a sorority in college, which taught me how to deal with 80 different personalities at any given time and how to communicate with them efficiently and effectively and take positions and ownership of different things. And I was able to bring that into my first job and then build off that to my second job. Again, I come from food manufacturing. In my blurb that you gave at the very beginning, I worked for a potato company. I'm an Idaho girl that worked for a potato company for 4 years. Potatoes and esports have nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing. But I was able to say, this is what I can do with potatoes. Now watch what I can do with esports and what we can do within this industry. And that's why I'm here. So really making sure we can transfer that over and have those conversations. And at the end of the day, a rejection is a no, and no's aren't always that bad. So it's okay to reach for the stars and maybe not land on it, but no matter what, just put yourself out there, look at those transferable skills and see what else you have out there. Because if I hadn't done that, I'd still be in a potato field for sure, not in an esports gaming realm where I still am not always sure what's happening.
I will say, I think Idaho potatoes are delicious, so.
They are, they very much are. I have so many fun facts about potatoes. My poor interns just get hounded with that.
So I want to throw out a couple of things that's at least super important to me. I've always been told, and I've always told people, just use the STAR method when you're explaining what your skills are and what you can do and your interests. So specific, task, action, and the result. I tell people to do that in your resume too. Like, that's super helpful. People need to see numbers and things that you've done. So I'll leave it at that. Okay, so next thing here, Mikey already sort of talked about this, but could you tell us what you consider to be genuine work experience? Some students only have their schoolwork to fall back on. So how do they make sure they represent the best parts of themselves online and on a resume? Now, your your intern is a biochem major in doing social media. That's amazing. I, for one, can't do either of those things. So that intern is great. But other than doing or being the social media manager of a esports team or program, like, are there other things that students can do to get real world experience?
Definitely.
Real world in quotes.
Right, exactly. I think definitely, and I'd love to hear what Dr. Kubani have to say about this as well. But one thing that I always look to is, do you work on student projects? Okay, you're working with a team. And that's I have to work on teams every day. Whether I want to do it or not, I'm working on projects with my team members. And those communication pieces, what were you actually responsible for? Did you work with an organization or a company that was local to you that you had to do? Do you have numbers to provide that information? That is real world experience. You're doing the exact same thing we're doing day to day. You're just doing it in a classroom setting and you're getting a grade on it. Whereas my career relies on a lot of these things that I'm doing. So it's the exact same thing. And really being able to dive in deep on that, I think, is important, just like you would on any other experience. What was your capstone? Did you have this in your capstone? Do you work in a different club, whether it's esports, business? Are you a part of a sports team? Sports teams are a great example of real world experience because, again, you're working together as a team. I talk to a lot of students, obviously, who are in the esports realm, who are coaches for their esports club or esports university sanctioned team. And that's strategic thinking. That's, coming up with conversations and how to do scheduling and how to, budget for how much money you have to travel to different tournaments. Same thing that I'm doing, but it's just at a smaller scale. And so thinking that way, I think, is most important. Whereas we're not programmed to think that way. We're only programmed to think that my experience is only valid if it's in the industry in a role that will get me to my next step. But that's not correct at all.
I 100% agree with everything that Mikey just said. The main thing I just want to add really quick, I was talking to one of my friends who's a recruiter who used to work at Blizzard about something that's been freaking me out as I look at job applications that I try to transition, is that most studios, or a lot of applications you see, will say must have shipped at least this many double or triple A games. You see that a lot on applications. A lot of times it's a bonus qualification. Sometimes it's even in the must category. But she made the excellent point that the games industry is so volatile with, games getting canceled, studios getting shut down, layoffs happening. that far fewer people than you think have actually shipped a game. So if you're trying to get into a development role, try not to panic too much about that. Because I got hired at my current job at a startup with nothing but student projects. And on my resume, I just made sure to use like relevant terminology, but not be so buzzwordy about it that it like lost clarity. Just like very clearly describe my contributions and my processes in ways that are relevant to the industry. And that was enough to get me in. And now I have work experience as well. And so, but it's, as I said, it's a startup, so we're working with a new IP, so we still haven't shipped anything. So I'm approaching it as far as like adding it to my resume exactly the same, just describing process, describing contributions, and trusting that, I'm representing myself and my abilities well enough that somebody will look at me and be like, hey, she seems cool.
I almost feel like that's all you can do. And one of the things that everybody has to learn, including myself, when you apply to something, you may not get it. And that doesn't, like, getting a no, to me, at least I think of it as a bright side of things. It was potentially a yes. You said no, but you looked at my resume and you said no to me. So you still looked, all right? Like, you still did something. So if somebody is watching this and you're like, okay, well, I keep applying, I don't hear anything back, I typically say keep going, obviously, but also rethink what everybody has just said here about resumes and how to stand out, and please apply that to your stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh, sorry, Dr. Cook, go for it.
I actually want to add like 2 more things. Okay, so I forgot your original question. I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna ride on the wave that's there. I have to say that a lot of my students, in particular, like I run a lot of independent studies with comp sci students because I'm in the English department, and so they take my games class, my game dev class, and they're like, I want more. And I think like out of those studies, like we've developed a game in which we presented at PAX East 2 years ago on a panel. And so I think like creating your own windows and doors. There are tons of doors and windows. If they close the door, like a no is good, because a no to me is like no, but you can create your own door, your own opportunity, because there are tons of opportunities to do that. I mean, just going to these conferences like PAX or GDC, you're rubbing shoulders with so many people, and just talking to them about their games, and something might spark them, something about you might spark them. They're like, oh, so what are you doing? And I've had tons of conversations like that. I'm like, I'm just an English professor. And then that's how I get to collaborate with people, because just putting yourself out there and rubbing elbows and talking with them. Number one. Number two, I sit on a few boards. One in particular is for sort of like a maker space, but it's a game maker space. I don't want to do the lame thing and say shout out to XYZ, but
I mean, you can if you want to.
I can. Okay, yeah. I will. So, but I don't. I'm just like worried about like dropping names and dropping titles and all
Understood.
that stuff. But I would say just being on the board, there are tons of people that I sit on the board with that are sort of those C-suite people, and so. And these C-suite people care about sort of the industry from a community standpoint, and so they volunteer their time on these community in these communities and on these committees. And if you just take the time to do these game jams that exist in the community, to do any of those things that exist, and working on projects or being a consultant for just doing audio design or something like that, you have your name, you have credits. Like, don't think of the big, like you got to make your own big game. You can also be on the credits of a game. And we all know that I love AAA, but the indie folks are changing and flipping the game. And so don't look at indie as, oh, that's the C level. But some indie people do go to AAA, and same vice versa. So be open to various trajectories to the place you want to be, and create these spaces for yourself.
Awesome. I will say I'm a huge indie game fan. Like, that's almost all I play. So you are absolutely right. It's taken over. So we are at our last 2 questions here. I'm still sticking with pipelines here, but now we're sort of shifting. And I know technically this question can work for everyone, but specifically, in what ways can both schools and the gaming industry build proper pipelines for women, femmes, and non-binary people? The reason why I bring this up is visibility-wise, whether it's esports or gaming, though we know there are plenty of women, non-binary, and femmes in the gaming industry, we don't tend to see it visibly, though we know that they're there. So how can we build better pipelines to not only improve that visibility, but give all of us a better chance to succeed in the games industry?
I'm happy to start with this. Coming from, food manufacturing in the supply chain, looking up the totem pole, I saw not a lot of people that look like me, not a lot of women, a lot of men. And I didn't want that. I wanted to jump into a space that I was going to be able to be a disruptor and make differences like this and bring women in and other individuals who aren't identifying as he, hims to come into this space. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I'm lucky in the space that I sit in at Evil Geniuses. I look up and I have two very powerful women above me, but we're not always seeing that across the board, like you mentioned. And I think the biggest thing right now is to let individuals know, we want you, we're looking for mm-hmm. you, and you just need to raise a tiny little finger and we'll spot you out in the crowd and say, come up here. I have 10 interns under me right now, and I have 3 of them identify as she, her. And 30% is, when we look at the grand scheme, that's pretty good, but out of 10, that's not so great. So where are my other individuals who do not identify as he, hims out there wanting to work for us? Because I know that they're there, like you mentioned, and making sure that we have conversations like this where we can come together and say, we want you, we're looking for you. We do a lot of things here at Evil Geniuses to ensure that we're bringing a focus in on those who we don't always think about in gaming. But we also have those conversations of how many LCS teams are there out there playing League of Legends, and they're all men. There's not one of them that's female dominated out there on the LCS scene right now. Why is that? Is it because we're just not giving them the opportunity, or is it because they're too scared to? So we need to make sure that we're, one, not creating a toxic space, we're removing those boundaries. We're also just, again, raising that flag and saying, we want you here, we need you here. Without us, women and the other identifying people, we're not going to be able to be self-sufficient and continue on the path that we're on. So that's really big. So anyone that's interested in internships, you should definitely take a look. We'll be opening ours here pretty soon, but again, I want more. We need help to make sure that people understand mm-hmm. that that's what we're actually looking for. And as much as I love my identifying students who are he, hims, I need other individuals to come in here too and really inspire and change the way that we're thinking about things and opening the doors for.
I want to take a little bit more of a zoomed out approach to this because it reminds me a lot of a conclusion that I came to when I was doing my undergraduate research thesis on representation in games, women and people of color versus their treatment in the community and versus their treatment in the industry. And the biggest thing I found from the industry perspective was that a lot of companies will say, well, we would love to hire more women, more non-binary people, more Black people, but the applicants just aren't there. And one of the people that I interviewed for my thesis was Dr. Kishana Gray, who teaches digital media theory. I think she's at the University of Kentucky now. Anyway, she had basically said, if you want that applicant pool, but it's not there, then what are you doing to grow it? Because, games is a multi-billion-dollar industry. A lot of these really big AAA companies, they can afford to invest in, after school programs or something in high schools, maybe even middle schools, maybe even elementary schools, and just being more proactive about fostering that interest in games, particularly because these community spaces are so toxic oftentimes, which, like Mikey said, we need to clean up. First of all, making sure that the space is safe and something that, marginalized people, particularly women as far as the toxicity goes, want to engage with and stay engaged with, and also providing the tools in the first place, the younger the better, in my opinion, in order to give people who are underrepresented in the games industry that leg up as they, get older and, want to go into either college or go straight into the industry.
Okay. I feel like you both gave incredible answers. I don't even know what to say to that. I'm Yeah, that's what we should do. And I will say, hopefully more brands out there, more gaming companies will build those pipelines. I see them every now and then, but I feel like there's like not enough money being put behind it when you make so much money off of those same people. So that's a whole nother conversation. So the last question, we're coming up at the end here. I know we talked a lot about gaming and advice, but just for you, just one quick thing, like what's the best piece of advice you can give students and or grads who want to enter the gaming industry? Like what's the best piece of advice that you can just tell them right now that's actionable?
I would say to know your worth and to protect your peace, because this industry is very prone to burnout, because it's an industry that's not like super possible to work in if you don't have a lot of passion, but a lot of companies will prey on that either covertly or even brazenly sometimes. And so the average career of somebody who works in game dev is under 10 years because the rate of burnout is so high due to, crunch culture and things like that, kind of pushing people to their limits. So I would say definitely know that you are worth having more than having a life outside of your job. That's something you are gonna really need to remind yourself of as you work in games, especially depending on which studio you work at. Some are definitely worse and some are way better than others. So yeah, hold on to that. Don't lose sight of yourself in the passion or in the job, because if you want to make it here, you're gonna need all of that inner strength.
My advice is just do it. Get out there and apply. What's the worst they can say is no? And we were talking earlier, no's are always positive in some way. If you knew that it's going to take you 20 no's to get your final yes, how many you'd be chasing no's all day? Mm-hmm. Just submit the application. Again, I never would have thought that I'd be sitting here a year ago or an esports org understanding kind of what League of Legends is and Dota 2 is and all that stuff. I never knew that. And I just applied, and I made sure that I had the qualifications for the most part, because as women, we want to make sure we got 100% of those qualifications. But I did, and I made it. I made it here. And you can do that too. You don't have to have all the experience. You don't have to have worked in this space before. You just need to apply. Make sure everything spells correctly and your template looks good too. But just apply. Get it out there. Rip the Band-Aid and say, hell yeah, let's move forward in this.
Nice. And I'll say, as a professor, I encourage my students to really exert agency and feel empowered to create their own learning education and not try to fit within the confines of a curriculum that's set there. As faculty, we encourage that mindset. Little do you all know, we want you to be empowered and to have practice agency and curate your own learning experience. We create spaces for you to do that. Trust me, talk to your deans. It's possible. And with that being said, I would say be critical about the industry. Don't try to fit, like when I research and I talk about and I write about what Bonnie said about representation, I call it the black box. Lack of representation in games is a black box. If you crack open that black box, there's so much disparity underneath that, and there's so many deficits in the industry, in the freaking world. If you see those deficits, use that to propel you, to give you passion to change, and that would make you go hard at doing the thing that you love and being in the industry that you want to see changed. While you're in school, don't look at it as, I got to finish this assignment. It's an assignment I have to do. Look at it as not only a resume building activity, but a skill sets building activity, a networking building activity. Although, internships are hard to come by, like Bonnie said, but one thing the industry loves to do is mentor and support individuals. Use that as your entry point to get in there, like we used to say back in the day, get in there like swimwear, right? Like that, use that. I'm giving my age.
I'm taking that though. I'm taking it.
Yeah. And that's it. Rip that Band-Aid off. Yeah.
Awesome. With that being said, I want to thank Mikey, Dr. Cook, and Bonnie for being here. For everyone out there, if you're interested in working in the gaming industry, there are many ways to get there, but it's clear that hard work will be the foundation. You need to give yourself a head start with the right curriculum, professional development, and connections to the industry. You'll be able to find your way to the start of your career. I'm Robin Mosley. This is Open World Dialogue, sponsored by Maximum Games. Bye and happy gaming. Bye, everyone.